The sun was still low when Eli Calder cut the mare loose and let her pick her way down the arroyo. The earth held the night's cold, and the stones were slick with it, dark as old blood. Somewhere ahead a hawk cried, thin and sharp, and the sound seemed to split the morning open. Eli rode with his hat brim pulled low, reins loose in one hand, the other resting on his thigh, where the old scar pulled tight when the air was cold. He'd come out for meat. The winter had been lean, and the ranch he worked had thinned its herd to nothing worth slaughtering. There were deer up in the higher scrub, sometimes antelope if you went far enough west. And he'd gone out before dawn with a rifle across his saddle and a sack tied behind. He had not expected to find a body. She lay half hidden under mesquite branches where the arroyo bent, the leaves dusted gray with sand. At first he thought she was dead. Her hair was loose, black as coal, tangled with burrs and dried blood.
Ow.
One arm lay crooked under her, fingers pressed into the dirt as if she were still trying to hold on to the ground. The other arm had been bound once rope. Marks cut into the skin, but the rope was gone. Eli slid from the saddle and stood there a long moment, listening. The desert was never silent, but it could feel that way if you let yourself believe it. He took one step closer, careful, his boots whispering in the dust. She breathed. It was shallow and uneven, but it was breath. A bullet wound, by the look of it. He knelt, setting the rifle aside, and touched 2 fingers to her neck. Her pulse was fast and weak. Apache, he thought. The lines of her face, the cut of her cheekbones, the faint blue-black marks near her eyes, older markings, not paint. She was young, younger than he'd first thought. No more than 20, maybe less. He should have turned away. He knew that. He'd lived long enough in that country to know what came of crossing lines drawn by fear and greed and men who carried badges. There were patrols that came through sometimes, and bounty hunters, and traders who would pay coin for Apache scalps or prisoners. Bringing her in would earn him money he could use. Leaving her would mean death by sun. And coyotes. He sat back on his heels and stared at the ground. The past has a way of rising up in moments like that, uninvited. He saw again the burned-out cabin, the shape of his father's body against the door, the way his mother's hair had spread in the dust like a black fan. He remembered the sound of horses running off into the trees, laughter carried on the wind. He remembered kneeling where he knelt now, his hands shaking, his breath coming. Too fast, Eli reached out and rolled the woman carefully onto her back. Her eyes fluttered open, dark and bright with fever. She tried to speak and coughed instead, blood flecking her lips. "Easy," he said, the word coming out rough, unused. He hadn't spoken aloud since the night before, and then only to the horse. She looked at him without fear, which unsettled him more than if she'd screamed. Her gaze slid to the rifle, then back to his face. He could see herself measuring him, even now. He took his canteen and poured a little water into the cap, held it to her lips. She drank greedily, then sagged back, eyes closing. He tore a strip from his shirt and pressed it to the wound, feeling the heat of her skin, the wetness beneath his fingers. The bullet had passed through clean, maybe, but infection would come if it hadn't already. Eli stood and brought the mare closer. He fashioned a sling from his coat, lifting the woman with care. She groaned once, a sound like a wounded animal, then went still. By the time the sun was high, he was riding back toward Dry Creek with a wounded Apache woman slung across his saddle and no meat in his sack. Dry Creek sat low in a bowl of dust and rock, place that had sprung up around a water source and refused to die. The buildings were weathered wood and false fronts, their paint long since bleached away. A line of hitching posts stood along the main street, most of them empty at that hour. The saloon doors were closed, the windows dark. Only the blacksmith's forge showed signs of life, smoke rising in a lazy column. Eli rode in slow, aware of eyes behind curtains, the way the town's attention could settle on a man like Waite. He kept his head down and guided the mare toward the far end, where the livery stood, and beyond it. The small shack he rented behind Mrs. Harlan's boarding house. Mrs. Harlan herself stood on the porch, hands on her hips, apron flapping in the breeze. She was a large woman with iron-gray hair pulled back tight and eyes that missed nothing. "Morning, Eli," she called. Then she saw what lay across his saddle. Lord, above. He didn't answer, just dismounted and carried the woman inside, pushing open the door with his shoulder. The room smelled of dust and old wood. A narrow bed stood against one wall, a small table against the other. He laid her down gently, then turned to Mrs. Harlan, who had followed him in. "She's hurt," he said. "Bullet wound." Mrs. Harlan stared, her mouth set in a thin line. "You bringin' trouble to my door, boy?" "I know." She sighed, the sound heavy. "I'll fetch clean water and bandages. But if Sheriff Cobb hears of this, I'll take what comes." She studied him a moment longer, then nodded and turned away. The woman burned with fever by midday. Eli sat by the bed, changing the bandages, coaxing water into her when she woke. She spoke once, a word he didn't understand, and he shook his head, murmuring something meant to soothe. Outside, the town came to life. Wagons rattled down the street, voices rose and fell. At some point, footsteps approached, heavy and sure. The door creaked open. Sheriff Cobb filled the doorway, his star catching the light. He was a broad man with a heavy jaw and eyes that were always calculating. Two deputies stood behind him, hats pulled low. "Well," Cobb said, taking in the scene. "Ain't this a surprise?" Eli stood, wiping his hands on his trousers. She was dying. Cobb's gaze flicked to the woman, then back. "That an Apache?" "Yes." "Where'd you find her?" "Out in the arroyo." Cobb stepped inside, his boots thudding on the floor. He leaned over the bed, peering at the wound. "Looks like someone put a hole through her. Wonder who'd do a thing like that." Eli said nothing. Cobb straightened. "There's a bounty on Apaches, you know, alive or dead. Folks been complaining about raids, stock going missing. Town council's keen to see something done." "She ain't raiding anyone," Eli said. "She's barely breath." Cobb smiled thinly. "Ain't up to you to decide that." Mrs. Harlan appeared in the doorway with a basin of water. She paused, took in the scene. "Sheriff, ma'am." She set the basin down with a thud. "This girl needs care. You ain't dragging her out into the street?" Cobb turned his attention to her, his smile tightening. "With all respect, Mrs. Harlan, this ain't your call." "No," she said. "But this is my house. I won't have blood spilled in it." The air thickened, the room suddenly too small. One of the deputies shifted his weight, hand brushing his gun. Eli moved then, stepping between Cobb and the bed. He didn't raise his voice. "She stays," he said. Cobb's eyes narrowed. He studied Eli, the scarred face, the quiet resolve. He knew the stories, same as everyone. The boy who'd lost his family. The man who drifted from ranch to ranch, never staying long, never causing trouble. "This ain't your fight." Cobb said softly. Eli met his gaze. "It is now." Cobb considered, then chuckled. "All right, I'll give you a day. Maybe two. But if she lives, she comes with me. Town's got plans." "What kind of plans?" Cobb shrugged. "Same as always. Ranchers need hands. Traders pass through, looking for labor." Eli felt something cold settle in his gut. Cobb turned to go. "Don't make me come back here angry, Eli." The door closed behind them, the sound loud in the silence. The woman woke that evening. As the light faded, she stared at the ceiling, then turned her head, eyes finding Eli where he sat. "You're safe," he said. Though he wasn't sure it was true, she spoke again, more words this time, her voice weak. He shook his head. "Don't understand." She frowned, then tried again, slower. "Water." He gave her the canteen. She drank, then handed it back. Her eyes never left his face. "Name," she said, touching her chest. Eli hesitated. "Eli," he said, tapping his own. She nodded. "Tala." They sat in silence, the space between them filled with the sounds of the town settling for the night. Somewhere a piano began to play, a mournful tune drifting on the air. Over the next days, Tala's fever broke. The wound closed, angry but clean. She spoke little, conserving her strength. Eli learned her ways in small gestures, the way she turned her face to the sun in the morning, the way she flinched at sudden noise. Word spread, as it always did. Men came by under pretense of curiosity, their eyes lingering. Ah! Cobb returned, his patience thinning. He brought papers, spoke of laws and orders. You can't hide her forever, he said. Eli said nothing. On the third day, the town council met. Eli did not attend, but he heard the results from Mrs. Harlan, her mouth set grim. They're selling her, she said. Tomorrow. Public auction. Sheriff's already got buyers lined up. Eli sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. Tala watched him, her eyes sharp. They want me, she said haltingly. Sell, he nodded. She was quiet a long moment. Then she said, I run, they catch, kill my brother. Her voice broke as she swallowed and went on. They shoot me. Leave, Eli closed his eyes. That night he saddled the mare. He packed what little he had, his rifle, his revolver. Mrs. Harlan stood in the doorway, arms crossed. You won't get far, she said. Far enough. She sighed. You always were like this. He smiled faintly. I know. Tala stood behind him, wrapped in his coat. She looked out at the dark, the desert stretching beyond the town. They made it as far as the old mill before the shots rang out. Cobb and his deputies rode hard, lanterns swinging. Stop. Cobb shouted. Eli turned in the saddle, firing once. Twice. The sound echoed off the hills. A deputy went down, screaming. The mare reared, panicked. They rode through the night, the desert a blur. By dawn, they were in the hills, the town a distant smear. They hid in a canyon, the walls rising sheer. Lee tended to Howe's wound, his hands steady, despite the fear gnawing. At him they will come, she said. Yes, he thought of the past, of the bodies in the dust, of the choices that had led him here. He thought of the town, of Cobb's smile, of the men who would pay coin for a life. When the riders appeared, silhouetted against the sky, Eli stood. He handed Tala the rifle. You know how to use it? She nodded. They stood back to back as the men approached, the silence heavy. In the end, it was brief and brutal. Shots rang out, echoes crashing, dust rose, the air filled with smoke. When it was over, Cobb lay in the sand, his star dulled with blood. Eli sank to his knees. A bullet. In his side, the pain a white-hot thing. Tala knelt beside him, her hands red. You go, he said. Follow the canyon. It will lead you to the high plains. She shook her head, tears streaking her face. She pressed her forehead to his. You come. He smiled, a small thing. Can't. She kissed his cheek, then rose, the rifle slung across her back. She looked once more, then turned and disappeared into the rocks. Eli lay back, staring up at the sky. The sun rose, painting the canyon walls gold. He thought of his family, of the weight he'd carried. He felt it lift just a little. When Mrs. Harlan heard the news days later, she closed her eyes and nodded. She would tell the story, and it would grow, as stories do. A cowboy went out hunting and came back with a wounded Apache woman. He did. Not return? Out in the desert, Tala walked on, the land opening before her, the future, uncertain, but her own.